Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Cultured Pull List. In today's episode, we're going to be covering Adventures of Superman Jon Kent, a 6-issue miniseries that focuses on Superman's son, Jon Kent, who also shares the moniker of Superman. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Mike, and on today's Cultured Pull List, we're going to be covering The Adventures of Superman Jon Kent, which, yes, does focus on Jonathan Kent, Superman's son. Now, for those of you who don't know, Superman did have a son with Lois named John. They named him after Superman's father, Jonathan. He was a kid for a while in the comics, though. He's about Damian Wayne's age, but at some point in the last couple years, he went to the future to fight crime with the Legion of Superheroes, and then at some point he was captured and held captive by Ultraman, and Ultraman kept him captive for several years. And when but it was kind of like outside of time. So when John returned back home, when he escaped and returned back home, he was a teenager, and he's been about like 18-ish ever since in the comics, maybe a little older. But now that he's older, he's also Superman instead of being Superboy. But this series is pretty fun. There's stuff in it that a lot of fans are kind of hating on, though me and Luke maybe had some different ideas. But it is really interesting because it deals a lot with the Injustice Gods Among Us universe. So that was really fun to see that universe in the main comics storylines. There's definitely a lot of cool stuff in this series, so let's get into it. Adventures of Superman Jon Kent was written by Tom Taylor, art by Clayton Henry and Derek Robertson. The inkers were Clayton Henry, Derek Robertson, and Norm Rapmond. The colorist is Jordi Belair, and the letterer is Wes Abbott. And this 6-issue series, released earlier this year from like spring to summer 2023. The actual publishing dates are May to October of this year, but obviously it's not October, and all 6 issues are already out. Yeah, that happens a lot with comics. The publishing date is later than it actually came out. But anyway, so our story begins with Ultraman, the evil version of Superman from Earth 3, killing a Superman from an unknown Earth. It seems like the real Superman, our Superman at first, but, he's quickly killed, and we do see that it says the Daily World, so this is obviously an alternate universe. So then we see the main universe. Jonathan Kent is with his boyfriend. Yes, for those of you who don't know, Jonathan Kent is bisexual, and he's in a relationship with Jay Nakamura, who is a hacker, I believe. But anyway, so John and Jay are walking in the park, just kind of talking, and then there's this weird green shooting star in the sky. Pretty much all the super family is off world except for John, so he realizes he's the only one that can handle this. So he goes out to space, sees the satellites being destroyed and hurtled to Earth, and he tries to stop them, but there's so many of them. And while he is attempting to stop them all, his body begins to be irradiated and taken over by this strange energy. It seems like blue lightning, but it's all over his body, engulfing him, and not just engulfing him because it's coming from inside him. So he's able to get a handle on it, though, before anything happens. And then he continues taking out the satellites, the pieces of the falling satellites, and just as he's about to get the last piece, someone ends up helping him, and it turns out to be Val-Zod, the Superman from Earth 2. Now, Val-Zod flies John back to John's farmhouse, his family home. He introduces himself to John, tells him he's from another Earth, and they meet with Mr. Terrific at John's house, because Mr. Terrific already knows Val-Zod, and he can vouch for him. And Val-Zod explains to John that they need his help to take down Ultraman, who's hopping from universe to universe, killing Supermen. And John explains to Val-Zod what Ultraman did to him, capturing him and keeping him imprisoned for years. Val-Zod realizes how personal it is, and there's this other person with Val-Zod, Red Tornado, an alternate universe of Red Tornado, which turns out to be Lois Lane, which surprises everyone. And she ends up convincing Jon to help them. And we do see a brief flashback here of Jon imprisoned in a volcano for years by Ultraman, and Ultraman would periodically visit him to taunt him and just be a downright douche. So then we cut to the Fortress of Solitude, where Jonathan, Val-Zod, Red Tornado, Lois Lane, and Jay have all gone to. And Jon pulls out this Phantom Zone projector from his father's armory, and he says that that's what they're going to use to take down Ultraman. So Jon says his goodbyes to his mom and Jay. His mom tells him that she's going to be worried because the last time he went away, things didn't go so great. But she gives him a crystal with a message on it, and she says, "Watch this if you need it." So Jon, Val-Zod, and Red Tornado go to the next universe that they're able to track Ultraman to, but unfortunately they're only able to track Ultraman after he kills a Superman. So they're basically able to track him to the next universe he goes to. So they track him down, but he still manages to get the drop on them and starts attacking them, and manages to nearly destroy Red Tornado before using the Phantom Drive projector that they brought to use against him, and uses it on Val-Zod and Red Tornado, which sends Jon into a fury, and that blue energy comes back and permeates his body. But this time it actually powers him up, and he's actually able to use this power to beat Ultraman, at least temporarily. But it also seems to drain Jon of all his energy. And with what little strength Ultraman has left, he attempts to kill Jon, but he's stopped and instead is himself killed by a Superman variant who turns out to be the Injustice Superman. And he is very shocked to see Jon, and even comments that Jon has his mother's eyes. And for those of you who don't realize, this version of Superman lost Lois and their unborn child due to the Joker, basically, using this mind control, which we do explore later. But anyway, back to the story. Jon wakes up in some hospital bed. He's being taken care of by Luthor, who explains that he's allies with Superman. And he explains that the power that he seemed to use is all the solar. Somehow Jon's body is able to take all the solar radiation that he absorbs, and he's able to channel it into basically just kind of like a burst of extreme power. And the only problem with it is that it leaves him drained of all solar energy afterwards, and he has to recharge. But while they're discussing this, Superman comes in, Injustice Superman comes in, and they talk about Jon being from another Earth, and that Jon came to save this is Superman, and Superman thanks him. But then an alarm sounds, and Superman has to leave with Wonder Woman, and Jon tries to come, but Superman won't let him. And it turns out they're on their way to the insurgency, an insurgency attack led by Batman, and Damian Wayne and Batman are about to fight when Jon shows up, and he actually gets there before Superman and confronts Damian and is like, "Why the heck are you attacking your dad?" And Damian just kind of brushes him off. And while they're talking, though, Batman manages to escape. So afterwards, Superman takes Jon, and he attempts to give him kind of a tour of the world that he's created, but Jon asks to check it out for himself, which Superman says he's okay with. And Jon goes off on his own, and he tell from the way how quiet the Earth is, there's no screams or bombs or gunfire or anything. He can tell that this Earth is different. And during this conversation, he actually mentioned to Injustice Superman he wondered why his dad never used his power like Injustice Superman has to make the world better. So all this is in his head when he's observing this version of Earth. But he actually does hear a baby falling from a building. A mom, I guess, dropped the baby. So he saves the child and gives it back to the mom. But as soon as the mom sees the Superman symbol, she's immediately terrified and says, "I'm sorry, it won't happen again," and then goes back inside. And John realizes in that moment that it was the Superman symbol that sparked that fear in her. And now he definitely is beginning to not trust this version of Superman or this seemingly perfect world. So in the next issue, the Justice League flies off to tackle a crisis on the planet Titan, and he ends up seeing Lex Luthor driving away in some truck, so he follows him all the way to the Insurgency's base, and it turns out Lex Luthor has the body of Ultraman, and it turns out whatever was inside Ultraman's suit, he has like a device in his suit that was able to drain the different Supermen from the multiverse's power, and that's how he was able to kill them. But just then, John shows up and kind of confronts them because they want to use this device against Superman, and he's like, "You want to hurt Superman? You want to hurt my otherworldly dad, basically?" And that causes the insurgency members to attack John, and he's able to dispatch them somewhat quickly, though they are stronger than he expects because if you're not aware with Injustice, I believe Lex Luthor or Batman, I can't remember which, but one of them developed these special pills that give people normal humans temporary durability and strength, and it kind of explains how they're able to go up against superhumans and metahumans and not just totally get splattered. But John ends up activating his solar, I guess, a blue electricity powers again, and is able to incapacitate them enough to explain who he is and that he doesn't fully trust this version of Superman. And they explain they explain what happened, that that Joker used a mixture of kryptonite and scarecrow fear toxin to manipulate Superman into thinking he was fighting Doomsday when he was really fighting, well, killing Lois and their unborn child, and that sent Superman over the edge. And Batman's very vindictive about it, and John kind of confronts him on it and says, "Hey, you're being kind of a dick, but I do believe what you're saying." And he does believe what they're saying, and he does want to stand against the regime, but he isn't quite sure what that means yet because he doesn't necessarily he isn't quite on board with totally using violence at this point. So he goes and he finds Damian. He confronts Damian and tries to figure out what happened. Oh yeah, and they also explain that Damian accidentally killed Dick, and that's why Batman and Damian are at odds. And John kind of calls Batman on that and was like, "Yeah, I bet you blame Damian for that, and that's why you're estranged." So John talks to Damian about this and tries to kind of reason with him, but Damian isn't having it, and he secretly puts a tracer on John. So John leaves this conversation and wants to find somebody he can trust that can give him another perspective on what's going on. So he goes and finds this world's version of Jay, his boyfriend, and he gets even more information about just how the regime took over the world, what Superman did after he accidentally killed Lois, and just how the regime has really affected the planet and the people in it within a really negative context, and that he killed Green Arrow and Black Canary in front of everyone. And well, he killed Green Arrow secretly, but then Black Canary he publicly killed. As soon as John leaves, Damian shows up because he had traced John there, and he aggressively interrogates Jay. So we do get a quick flashback in this next issue showing Superman hallucinating, seeing Doomsday and fighting him and actually killing. And at this time, we see that John has gone back to the insurgency to talk to them about what their game plan is, and he, tells them that he knows everything, and he does feel compassion for this version of Superman, but at the same time, it doesn't excuse what he's done, obviously. And everyone there says that John reminds them of Lois, which is interesting. And Harley kind of tries to get forgiveness, I guess, from John because she was involved. She was with Joker when His plan was enacted, but Jon's like, that wasn't me. You're not really gonna get forgiveness of me, but you're not really gonna get forgiveness from me because it wasn't me you wronged. But just be a better person. That's all you can really do. So then we cut to Superman and Damian, and Superman's mad at Damian for capturing Jay, saying that he overstepped, but they still keep Jay captured. Damian reveals that he still has that tracer on Jon, and they're able to trace Jon, unfortunately, to the insurgency's lair. So Jon and the insurgency come up with a game plan. Batman's gonna distract Superman, and the rest of the insurgency is gonna take out the rest of the Justice League and go from there. So they're gonna rest that night and enact their plan in the morning. And Jon goes back to Superman's fortress to avoid raising suspicion, but it's a little late at that point because as soon as he leaves, Superman and his regime Justice League show up and defeat the Justice League, or not the Justice League, they defeat the insurgency, and are able to capture them all. But Jon, instead of going back to Superman, actually ends up going to his Fortress of Solitude and ends up playing the message that his mom gave him on that crystal. She says he's sorry for all he's went through with Ultraman, but that she admires him for not letting his hatred of Ultraman cloud his judgment and overtake his ability for compassion and empathy. And she says that those are his greatest powers, and that you've chosen to confront your greatest fear, and just kind of giving him a pep talk and reminding him of his good qualities that really make him Superman, not his superpowers, but his empathy and compassion for people, and his ability to let go of his hate and face his fears. But it turns out that this version, Injustice version of Ma and Pa Kent are there, and Jon talks to them briefly, and they express that they're worried about what their son's done, but they still love him because he's their son. While this is going on, Jon and the parents see on the TV that Superman has captured the insurgency, and that Harley Quinn and Batman are going to be publicly executed the next day. So this Jon realizes he's on his own at this point and has to figure out how to save them. So the next day, Superman is preparing to execute the insurgency, but all the Justice League members are expecting Jon to show up, but they all split up and go across the globe to search for Jon, whereas Superman is prepared to face him at the actual execution at the Hall of Justice. But Jon, meanwhile, is in space, and he's powering up in front of the sun because he knows whenever he uses his new solar energy power that it drains him, so he needs to have some extra stores there. But he actually talks to the Flash first, and he's able to draw out some doubts that the Flash has with Superman's regime and his treatment of people. And he's able to convince Flash to basically just not get involved. But Flash says, like, if you hurt him, I'm going to catch up to you. So he's able to dispatch or kind of take Flash off the board without fighting him. And the rest of the Justice League members, he's able to also dispatch without really hurting them, though he does de-wing Hot Girl. So I'm guessing these are like nth metal wings, because I feel like if they were real wings, that would be really kind of messed up. But he's able to just take the ring off of Hal Jordan. And when it comes to Wonder Woman, he does fight her, but he powers himself up, and he's able to just fly her out into deep space and leave her there. And he knows she'll survive, but it'll take her a while to get back. So he rushes back to Earth and confronts Damian again. And now he has the lasso of truth, Wonder Woman's lasso of truth, and he has Damian hold on to it and asks him, like, do you really want your dad to die? And Damian says no. Jonathan says, you're stronger than just seeking for a dictator's validation and approval. So then we cut to Superman, and he is getting angry at Jay, kind of taking out his anger on Jay, saying that he turned Jon against him. But just then Jon shows up, and Superman is angry. He just kind of wants a fight, and he, like, if Jon's not on his side, he wants them to come to blows. So he ends up breaking Jay's arm to elicit an emotional response out of Jon, which kind of works, but he activates his power, but instead of attacking Superman, he goes and gives him a hug, which it's kind of funny, but he kind of expresses sympathy and kind of tries to talk him down and say, you're supposed to be Superman. You're supposed to be a symbol of helping people and hope, and you're definitely not that. You're not Superman right now. And unsurprisingly, Superman doesn't react too kindly to this, and he does attack John, but John refuses to fight him. Keep in mind, this is in front of a lot of people, and John's trying to show them that Superman can be better, that he can stand up for what's right without necessarily having to hurt people. And he basically says that to Injustice Superman and to the gathering crowd, and that Superman doesn't kill people. He isn't cruel and vengeful. And the Superman you have right now is not. He's not really being Superman. And he actually ends up playing Lois's message, or at least part of it, for Superman. And this actually seems to get to Superman, touch him a bit emotionally. But before anything else can happen, John is hit with this gun that Cyborg made that is able to send John back to his own Earth, Earth Zero. And that's pretty much where this wraps up. John shows up back in his own universe, the main universe, and there's kind of a tag to this new crossover Beast World coming in November. But that is really the end. Alrighty, so me and Luke actually read this as the comics were coming out. Um,
Yes.
so like one issue at a time, like 1 month at a time, pretty much.
Hmm, hmm,
But it
hmm.
was nice to go back and actually read it from start to
Right.
finish as like one story instead of having to wait like a month between each chapter.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, what are your overall thoughts on Adventures of Superman, Jon Kent?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think now it's definitely up there, one of my favorite Superman stories, to be honest.
Nice.
I thought it was really interesting because there's a lot of different versions of Superman that we see throughout this whole
Yes.
story. We see Ultraman,
Mm-hmm.
I think is it Earth 2 Superman?
Yeah, at least what he was
Uh,
originally, at least. Yeah.
yeah, okay. And then obviously the Injustice one as well. And
Right.
it's very interesting to see the way that all of these different Supermen like inhabit the title of Superman, because up
Mm.
until this point, for the most part, there's only ever really been Clark Kent as Superman, but then recently it
Right.
was introduced. Jon Kent was introduced, and then
Right.
so that whole character and this whole story as an extension is sort of the meditation on what like Superman means and how the different ways the
Mm-hmm.
different characters interpret that mantle, as well as like the powers that come along with it.
Yeah, no, yeah, I totally agree. I did kind of like the deep dive into kind of what Superman is, but also like Jon Kent's journey
Right.
into like what Superman he wants to be, and not just
Hmm.
like copying his dad, but more like stepping into the role and like the symbol of what Superman is.
Right.
I will say the timeline is kind of confusing.
Okay.
Like I'm trying to figure out where in the hell this takes place in the Injustice timeline.
Sure.
Um, because it's obviously because the game takes place kind of at the end of the whole timeline. You have like 5 years of comics,
Mm, yeah.
and then you have the game, which in the game the regime's dismantled, Superman's defeated, all that. And you also have the crossover between Prime Earth and the Injustice Earth.
Right.
So this obviously takes place before that. So I guess the
Yeah.
Injustice game takes place in the future, I guess.
Hmm.
But it's kind of not clear like where in the timeline. Like I'm guessing before like year 5, I'm guessing or something, but it's not really clear like how this story fits in with the like what's already been
Right.
established. It's like the Injustice canon. Um
Yeah, because at the end, I didn't even think about that, but at the end of this story,
mhm.
Superman kidnaps Batman, Harley Quinn, and a bunch of the other characters,
Yes.
and like that would be pretty big on the rest of the timeline. But I'm not super familiar with Injustice, but like that seems like a
Right.
huge thing, and I don't know how that would fit in with the rest of the comics.
I mean, John did break them all out at the end. So I guess they just sort of like
Sure.
run away and go back and then just like never mention it again. um,
That is true.
I guess is the idea. Also, what's confusing is some of the costumes they use are the costumes from the game, but they're the ones that the
Mhm.
Prime Earth
Oh,
characters have, like Harley Quinn and Flash. I
yeah.
believe both have their costumes from like the Prime Earth. I mean that's not too that's not too much of a big deal because you could just explain, oh well, they changed their costumes between this and the game, you know.
Yeah.
I think for me though, like one of the biggest things is how old Damien is,
Yeah.
because and only because earlier in like issue 2 or something, Val Zod said to John that time passes the same everywhere in the multiverse, and
Mm,
that's why they couldn't find a John, who was an adult that didn't live in like
right.
a really crappy world. But then why isn't Damien the same age? Like he seems older
Yeah.
than like Prime Earth
Right.
Damien. So I feel like I don't know, that might be a
Yeah.
plot hole,
That
or
doesn't
maybe
make
I'm
any sense. That's
overthinking
you're right.
it. uh,
Yeah.
but besides all that, it was very very cool. Right
Hmm.
from the get go, from the first issue, I was like, because it said like prelude to injustice. I'm like, what the hell is this? And
Right.
I did
Right.
really like that they had a big crossover with the Injustice world, with the main
Yeah.
comic universe. I feel like, well, yeah, they haven't really done that at all outside of the game, and the
Yeah.
game,
Right.
like, it was never really clear if Injustice was actually a canon continuity,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
outside of like the game and like the prequel comics. um
Right.
but it's cool to see the Injustice universe actually like established in the main DC comic canon. I thought
Yeah.
that was fun, and I did like that there was kind of more of an exploration of Injustice Superman in this.
Yeah.
Then like we do get to see, like, the game just shows you a little bit. The comics go way more into detail, as how he kind of fell from being a good Superman to
Right.
an authoritarian dictator. um but in this, we kind of get to see like a somewhat softer side to him when John shows
Hmm.
up, which we don't see at all in any of the other Injustice media, as far as I know. Like, I haven't read all of the comics.
Right.
I think I've read like year one, and I've played the game. But I did like that they kind of we got to see kind of another side of this version of Superman, and we also got to see the Injustice universe like through the eyes of somebody outside of that world.
Right.
Like, you see that in the game, but it's not exactly the same, because they all have counterparts, whereas John doesn't have a counterpart on that
Yeah.
Earth.
Yeah.
I thought all that was interesting. What did you think of like the end, like kind of how he handled the Justice League and Superman and everything?
I honestly really liked it. I thought it was
Hmm.
an interesting take on it. I know a lot of
Yeah.
people didn't like it because it's like, oh, he just gave him a hug. But I feel like
Yeah.
it's really different, and I wasn't expecting
Hmm.
it. And I appreciate when things are able
Yeah.
to do that, but still,
Not
like
suck.
they're able to kind of surprise us and
Yeah.
like not suck, but also
Yeah.
like it's not like that, not like payoff, but like it fits with the rest of the story, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I see, like it makes sense within the narrative.
Hand in hand with that, I really liked the new power John has.
Yeah.
Like being able to kind of like um charge himself up, I guess, with the solar radiation, and that I think
Hmm.
that's really cool, and you kind of get to see him kind of learn to control that power more by the end of this
Yeah.
series. But I think
Yeah.
it's really cool. Not only is it just a cool power, but I think it helps distinguish him from his dad, from Superman.
Yeah.
Instead of,
Yeah.
like, they already did that well with his personality, but it kind of makes him not feel like a Superman clone. He
Right.
is Superman, but he's not his dad. And
Mhm.
yeah, like you were saying, the way he, at the end, giving Superman a hug and refusing to really like, he fought against the Justice League without hurting them.
Yeah.
And I feel like, yeah, it's easy to kind of dismiss that as like, oh man, this Superman's a pussy.
Right.
But like it's not like he was like, well, I think the regime is wrong, but I'm just gonna stand back and do nothing because I don't want to hurt. Like, it
Mhm.
wasn't like that. And
Right.
honestly, I feel like it takes. like an immense amount of power to be able to take all of them down without
Right.
having to hurt them. Like it'd be way easier to just like clobber them.
Right.
But the way he was able to um, take them out, whichever way he did. Like with Wonder Woman, he used more force, but with the others, he just kind
Mhm.
of disabled them without actually hurting them. I like you
Right.
like you said, I thought that was unique, but I also feel like it showed more like strength than just like
Mhm.
beating the
Yeah.
crap out of them would have. And
Right.
also, I don't think I just because he like hugged Superman or whatever at the end doesn't mean he's like, yeah, what you're doing is okay. Because like the whole time, the whole series, he was saying like, yeah, I know Superman went through a tragedy. That doesn't excuse anything he's done, and he even said it
Exactly.
to his face in that scene. And
Mhm.
Superman was like, "You condescending little shit,"
Yeah.
which I think is good too. I think it would have been maybe a little bit contrived if he was like, "Wow, you gave me a hug. You're right. I'm bad."
Right.
Um,
Right.
but I also did like how he played Lois's message to Superman, and that's like what got to him. Um,
Yes.
though I will say, like, it doesn't really seem to do much good because he's still like, you know, an ass,
Right.
But still, it was a really cool scene.
Yes.
Um, I will say I feel like the ending was a bit disappointing just because I feel like it was right there at the climax, and then John just gets sent back home.
Right.
I feel like that. I feel like everything was cut short, and there wasn't even
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
a short tag at the end showing what happened to the Injustice world or like anything right after John left. I feel like it
Right.
kind of left some threads there, um, on I don't know, some loose
Yeah,
threads.
and that kind of leads to my main criticism is that I wish it
Hmm.
was longer because
Yes,
there's like that whole part in the beginning with Ultraman and there's also
yes,
like Superman Injustice and if this was
hmm,
like 12 issues long, I feel like we could both do both of those stories justice,
yeah.
but instead they're just kind of like brushed over, you know?
Yeah, I feel like the beginning of the story was taking its time to set things
Yeah,
up, and then the last like two issues felt like they just went like full steam ahead, and it felt a little rushed.
right.
And yeah, they had that whole storyline with Ultraman and like John battling with his feelings against him because of he imprisoned John and everything. But
Yeah.
then he just kind of gets killed, and that's the last. Like we don't even fully understand his motivation. Besides, it's suggested that he's going around to other Earths to stop Supermen before they can stop him. I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and he had that thing in his suit that like sapped the energy from them, which I thought was interesting. But and
Right.
with Val Zod too, like Val Zod shows up and then just kind of gets teleported away, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of felt like they were. I don't know, that storyline felt kind of incomplete. Um,
Yes.
I kind of like if they do circle back around and expand more on that and more on the Injustice, like what happened directly after this in the Injustice world a little bit, then I think
Mhm.
it'd be a really
Yeah.
good like first chapter or something to whatever comes next. But if they don't, it really feels
Right.
like a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, overall, it was very interesting. It was very cool. I was not expect. I kind of just expected it to be just a straight up Jon Kent like solo storyline. I didn't
Mhm.
expect it to be this like multiversal injustice thing. That was a cool
Right.
surprise,
Right. Yeah, it was.
and it was cool seeing Jon like interact with all the other injustice characters like on the insurgent side. Like
Yeah.
Batman, Harley Quinn, and all that stuff, and just the way they reacted to him. Um,
Mhm.
because he was like, oh, it's the kid that Superman didn't get to have on this earth.
Right, right.
And I think the whole thing with that, this doesn't really apply just to this story, but the whole idea of injustice and like the themes it covers, where Superman um turns evil, but like it starts out more he's just like you know intent on protecting the world, but
Yeah.
in doing so, he basically has to take everyone's freedom
Right.
and rule with an iron fist, and everyone's afraid of him. And that's
Mhm.
even a theme with John, because like at the beginning, he always wonders why his dad doesn't do more to save the planet,
Yeah.
and then like he
Yeah,
realizes
that's
like
right.
to do more, he basically has to be like an authoritarian and take people's freedom. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's like a kind of a philosophical idea that can even kind of be like pondered in like real life stuff.
Yeah.
When it comes to world leaders or even, ideas of like a higher power or something.
Right.
Like the more perfect you try and make the world, oftentimes you kind of have to take, be like authoritarian with it, which, isn't usually great.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Which I find, yeah, I find that very interesting, and that was kind of cool.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I feel like there was something else I was gonna say, but now, oh yeah, I have a question. I don't know if you have any, any thoughts, but if so like in the Injustice worlds, Superman turns, like it's a chain reaction of events, but it all starts with him being poisoned by the Joker and killing Lois Lane and his unborn child.
Uh-huh.
Do you think if that happened on like the Prime Earth to the Prime Superman, do you think like the same or very similar thing would happen? Do you think, you know, pretty much our Superman would become corrupt, or do you think it would be go down differently?
I think it might go down differently. My answer
Mm-hmm.
might be a cop out, but I think
Sure.
like for like publication reasons, I don't think that they
Yeah.
would be able to do that.
Okay. Fair
But
enough. Fair
honestly,
enough.
I don't think that the character as presented in the Prime Earth, Prime Superman, I don't think he would do that.
Yeah.
Honestly, the way that I understand the character, I don't think he would do that.
Yeah. I kind of didn't think about that until this, like rereading this, but the way like John talks to this Superman and saying like, you're not really Superman, the real Superman wouldn't let his grief turn him into the monster you become. I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing, but that kind of
Right.
made me think like, huh, and then now that I think about it, if the roles were reversed and this happened to Prime Superman, like he probably wouldn't, become this fascist dictator like this Superman did.
Right.
So
Right.
kind of makes you think like he kind of this Superman kind of started out with less moral fiber, I guess, than like the main
Yeah.
Superman,
Right.
which
Right.
I find very interesting.
Hmm.
But yeah, before we wrap things up, let's do our cultured picks. What do you have for this week?
This week I have the Night Terrors Titans tie-in.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah, and it's they're kind of I only read the first issue so far. There's two that have
Hmm.
been released. I haven't gotten the second one yet. But they're kind of like in this nightmare version of Titan's Tower, and it
Mm.
starts out with I can't remember who it starts out with, but one of the Titans, and then they have to go to a different room and they have to like free the other one from their nightmare, and then now there's two, and they have to go to the next room, and
Oh,
so on and
cool.
so on until you have all of the main four or five characters that are all like free, and now they have to free for themselves from like
Hmm.
um oh yeah, because Raven was it because she's like astral projection, so she's not actually in the nightmare, so she's able to like
Oh,
start the reaction to free
that's
all the other
fun.
ones, and then and now that they're all together, they have to apparently in this a second issue. I guess they just wake up collectively. But I haven't read the second issue yet, so I don't know. But in this first one,
Oh,
they're just
okay.
kind of freeing each other from their collective nightmare.
Gotcha. Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the Robin Night Terrors
Yeah,
thing where Red Hood and Tim Drake kind of helped each other break out of their own personal nightmares, and they woke up
right.
together.
Hmm.
Yes, well, sticking in the Night Terrors vein, I have Night Terrors number two, though this
Uh,
this did come out like in like July or something, but I haven't read three and
yeah,
four yet.
right.
But I actually couldn't get my hands on three yet. I've gotten four, but I haven't read it
Hmm.
yet. But two is really interesting because it brings back the original Sandman. He kind of gets resurrected. I can't remember his name.
Like the one before the Neil Gaiman one, that was like from like the
Yes.
50s. Okay.
Yes. So that starts in the Neil Gaiman one, it was kind of retconned where Morpheus was the original, Sandman.
Hmm.
But while Morpheus is like imprisoned for decades, Wesley Dodds, that's his name.
Okay.
Wesley Dodds becomes a superhero and becomes like the Sandman while Morpheus is in prison, kind of thing. But anyway, so
Hmm.
in Night Terrors, Wesley Dodds gets resurrected and helps Deadman with,
Okay.
all the nightmares and kind of fight insomnia. And I thought that was fun because I was kind of thinking, though I was thinking of Morpheus, but I was thinking like, man, this would be like a perfect, story to have the Sandman in, with dreams and
Yeah.
everything. Though, like, I'm not
Right.
really sure what the canon status of Morpheus is in DC
Yeah.
at this point, because all those Sandman comics were like in the 90s, or 80s.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, that is pretty fun, and we get a little more backstory on it, Insomnia, and he has like a certain DC character working for him that you don't expect. It's pretty interesting.
Ah.
I'm looking forward to reading the rest. So I think the main story of Night Terrors, if you don't want to get like all the spin-off like connected issues, I believe it
Yeah.
starts with like, I forget what the first thing is. There's like a first special, um
Yes.
like first, what is it?
Oh, what's it called?
First blood.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And then it goes one Night Terrors 1, 2, 3, 4, and then Night
Yeah.
Terrors Night's End.
Yes.
So it's like a 6 issue arc,
Hmm.
really. So if you want to read that, I would definitely suggest checking out, especially if you're into horror and horror comics, because it kind of blends
Yeah.
some horror with the main DC universe, which is always fun.
Yes.
Though I kind of wish they had more of like the Justice League Dark characters in the main
Mm. Yeah.
story. Like I know they're like asleep with it with everyone else, but I feel like they really would have lent a lot to this story. But
Yeah.
you know, yeah. That being said, pretty cool. That definitely check out Night Terrors if you're interested.
Right.
And that is gonna be the episode for this week.
Yep.
This has been the Cultured Pull List. This has been the Cultured Pull List. Thanks so much for joining us. If you would like to support us so we can keep bringing you more great content, check us out on patreon.com/theculturednerd and look for our show's specific tier. Huge thank you to all of our current Patreon supporters: Wesley H., Mitch S., Connor Y., Anna M., Oscar B., Craig L., and Salib K. We sincerely could not do this without you. We really, really appreciate your support. I have been your host, Michael Malillo, and my co host, though briefly, has been Luke S. And a huge thanks to Jose Navarro as well for designing our logo and our visual assets. Thank you once again for joining us. If you liked this video, hit like, subscribe, leave a comment, and let your friends know about this show. If you'd like to check out The Cultured Nerd on social media, you can scan the QR code on the bottom left. And if you would like to check out Casual Experts, me and Luke's other brand, which includes Casual Experts Only, a podcast also part of the Cultured Nerd Podcast Network, you can scan the QR code on the bottom right. Until next time.